welcome back to CrimsonCast. Galen, Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. It is Sunday, September 7th. Indiana is 2-0 in college football, and we're going to talk all about what we saw this weekend as the Hoosiers defeated Kennesaw State at home by the count of 56-9. We're going to talk about all the elements that came out of that game, both the stuff on the field and some of the stuff in the stands or not in the stands, as the case may be. We'll also talk about some of the questions that you folks have directed to us. We are live for this show. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict, and so we decided to just push it into the early afternoon. So we got the coaches poll. We can talk about that. We can't talk about the AP poll yet unless we podcast for a solid hour, which, knowing us,
that's happened.
I would bang the over on that if I were all of you. But if you've got your questions, you can actually send them right to us. Use YouTube. Go to the YouTube comment section and comment live. It's one of the advantages of subscribing to the Back Home Network on YouTube is that you know when we go live and you can leave comments and we can pop some of them up, just like we did here with Justin Beard. Hi, Justin. Good to see you. If you'd like to comment on the show as it's going on, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear from you. Scott, welcome back. You spent 2 separate days in Bloomington this past week, including our live show that we did at the Buskirk-Chumley this past Friday. It's good to see you again. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, back-to-back trips, Friday, Saturday. The live show, thank you to everybody who came out. We had an absolute blast. It was a ton of fun. I was excited about it, and it exceeded all expectations. It's so great to see everybody. Really appreciate the support. I tried to say it in person there and kind of stumbled a little bit, but it meant a lot. It was really a cool event. We had a great time. We hope to do more of them again. And then, came home, went back to the game on Saturday. Just beautiful weather. Had a great time. We're doing well. And now we're doing live. Like, live's our thing now. We're going into a live setting.
All live all the time. And no, we're not actually doing that. But no, it's great to have you all.
You've been scared with me with like saying something wrong that you have to edit out. Like Friday was like, well, Scott did okay there. We'll give him one more try to go live.
Yeah, it's one of those where we had the hook ready. We had a padded cage backstage if Scott had said anything live that we didn't want him to. But you passed the test, buddy. Congratulations.
That chair. You're like, that's the chair with the drop. It drops, the stage drops out. Yeah.
I was actually really looking forward to pressing the button just to see we could have it. Scott's just like mid thought, and it's like, and he's gone.
I was gonna say a curse word.
That's right. But but thank you so much first to the entire staff at the Buskirk-Chumley Theater. They were awesome. Jordan and Clayton and that whole crew. Thanks to Kirkwood Sweet Shop for baking. It was a really nice cake. We had a piece of that before the show over, and it was awesome. It was red velvet with cream cheese frosting, so it wasn't too sweet. Really yummy. They had a whole nother cake. So if you haven't gotten a piece of your CrimsonCast cream and crimson cake, go in and get a piece. Bring a friend. I would, because you and I split one.
Yes.
Not the whole cake, just a piece. These are sizable pieces of cake, but very good. And certainly a huge thanks to the folks that joined us on stage. Our Back Home Network brethren, Ryan Phillips, flew out to be on the show and support us, and we certainly are always appreciative. Ryan always goes the extra distance, and we truly appreciate his camaraderie and friendship and his contributions. Our thanks to Mitchell Page, who came down and kind of stole the show, as we knew he would. I mean, Mitchell Page being a great live show figure, I had at about minus 1,600. I mean, that was almost a foregone conclusion. But Mitchell had some great insights on having been a member of IU football, his observations on the team, his observations now as a fan and an alum. A huge thanks to Griffin.
A Mitchell story, which I can tell. It was after the show. We're walking around, but I mean, I don't think he'll mind me telling because he told it to a bigger group. But we walked by the Uptown. He's like, "Oh, that's where I had a first date in college." He's like, "How'd it go?" He's like, "Didn't go well." Like, I guess during the day, she's like, "I thought you played football because you're shorter and like pudgier than I thought you were gonna be."
Wow.
Yeah.
He definitely played football.
Great dinner, so it was good for me.
Yeah, that's money. It's we definitely had Mitchell Page highlights during the show, including his now not a record, but at the time, a record punt return.
Right.
And it was great actually him talking about that experience of being in the stands and watching Jonathan Brady, get 1 yard further in his punt return. But no, Mitchell was great. We really enjoyed having him on.
He gave a magnet out. He jumped off the stage and then came back and just like jumped it, pommel forced it. And later on that night, I was talking to our friend Mike Petrie, trying to hop back on stage, and I banged my shin. I was bleeding. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not. That's why I didn't play D1.
And then, of course, Griffin Gonzalez driving down, your voice of IU football on the field, and he had some nice insights on the Bison and just the overall vibe being on the field here for the last few years and how much it's changed. And again, a huge thanks to everybody that attended. I mean, we had probably about 70 people total in attendance, which was a great first effort from a live show perspective in a theater. And we're hoping to do more of these in the future. So thanks to all of you who took part, who came out. We had a nice Q&A session at the end. We had people coming up asking questions. It was just a really fun time, and we had a great time with it. And
the only thing I regret is I talked to the sound guy before the show, and they have a disco ball up there. I was like, can you fire that up? And he fired it up, and he's like, you want to, like, no, like, wait. Like, it was actually me and Ryan, like, figured it out. I was like, well, I'm going to have it fired during the show, and just kind of, because I know that'll, like, make Galen laugh and also annoy him. And then I just forgot. I completely forgot to be like, fire up the disco ball. There was never the moment, and I forgot. So it'll happen next time.
This is why we don't let Scott have the steering wheel of the show. Just in general.
The disco ball would have been great. I was thinking of it for Q&A. No, disco ball.
Scott belongs in the passenger seat, and Ryan is the backseat driver. This is always the rhythm, regardless of the shows on the Back Home Network. No. But anyway, thanks to all of you. And we are looking forward to the next one. So we'll see how that goes. But before we get started on this show, just, of course, a quick reminder, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. New store open on Kirkwood Avenue, Home Field at Trax. If you've been in town at all for these IU games the last couple of weeks, hopefully you've had a chance to stop by the store, as they've got all of your IU favorites from Home Field Apparel in the store. So go check it out if you're coming in for the Indiana State game coming up on Friday, or if you're coming in for that Illinois game in a couple of weeks. I think there's going to be some special stuff planned for the store in the lead up to that game as well. So again, Home Field at Trax, right next to Village Deli on Kirkwood Avenue, just a couple of blocks down from the Sample Gates. And of course, you can always go to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23 and get 15% off your first order. All right, Scott, let's dive in. We got a ton to talk about. And again, if you folks have questions about anything along the way and you're watching us live, you can use the YouTube chat to jump in and ask questions during the live broadcast here. And we had a couple of people tweet some questions in as well. So we're going to get to all of those. But let's start by going through what happened with the game last night. Indiana winning 56-9, a beautiful, beautiful day in Bloomington. Yes. Maybe arguably better weather than the previous week, which was already pretty darn good weather. And Indiana this time played as well as the weather looked and really established control relatively early and kept pouring it on throughout the course of the game. They end up with another dominant performance from a yardage perspective, and they also end up getting the passing game going in a way that just did not happen the previous week. They had some really interesting plays that certainly yielded some very positive results. And even though there were a couple of things that you could be, I think, mildly concerned about in terms of defense, by and large, it was a pretty good effort all the way around by this Indiana team. 56-9, one of the largest margins of victory that we've seen from IU against an FBS opponent in a long time. Scott, your overall impressions of yesterday's win?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those things. I would say it still feels like the offense is not crisp yet. And that would be the concerning part. I mean, we can sit here and talk about how great it was. We won big numbers, and all the offensive and defensive numbers are going to look really good because you did what you're supposed to do. All I will say, there's still some passes that weren't quite there, still kind of crisp. It still feels like they might have, the training wheels on Mendoza a little bit. And I guess that's the part where it didn't look as dominant as our offense did at times last year. And so that would be my concern. And on the defensive side too, you had, Kennesaw State had 3 straight plays where they score points, field goal, field goal, field goal. And then they were driving. We made a great play to get a fumble, which they had to look at it and then look at it again and then finally realize the fumble. And it felt like at that point in kind of the second drive of the third quarter is when the defense locked in. Is like, all right, we're done. We're done playing around. And then it was interception and then punt on 3 plays, 5 plays, 3 plays. And so it felt like it took the team a little bit of time to get locked in. They got unlocked and then locked back in on the defensive side. But that's all I would say on the offense side. We'll dig into things. I mean, everything looks really good. I'm just being a little bit with a critical eye looking at the offense. It still feels like the running game is really good. What I don't know is that just the opponents were playing, the way they're running things, like the running game looks really good. The passing game still looks like they're trying to figure out some of the timing. But I will say it looks way better than it did last week against Old Dominion.
It's one of those things where a lot of what we think about with a team is oftentimes predicated on how quickly things happen.
Right.
And this is where Indiana, you look at what they did in that first half, and they're up at halftime 21-6. And I think that's stuck in the minds of a lot of people, and maybe is still sticking in the minds of some people as we look back on the game today, because 21-6 at half against a bottom quarter team in FBS isn't great. But then you win 56-9, and I think you've got to take the full 60 minutes in totality, because a lot of times what happens, I've noticed, and I think we see this more and more now with Indiana and the way that we watch Indiana, is we look at scores from around the country and we'll see, Washington beat that team 66-14, or Alabama won that game 73-0. And that's all that sticks in your head. And if you watch some of those games, they are actually just as slow in terms of the scoring and the way that things happen early in games.
Yeah.
And so I think we got to be careful about judging Indiana too harshly because we watched the whole game versus what we think other teams are doing. And so from my perspective, yeah, it took a little bit of time to get things rolling, but it was still a dominant statistical performance even in the first half for Indiana. And yes, it took a little bit of time, I think, for the overall approach that the offense was taking to truly even out. But once it did, and I think once you started to see balls being caught, like I don't even know, we heard a little bit about the drops, and I think sometimes the drops are on Mendoza and the way that he's throwing the ball. I remember that first throw to Surratt that he dropped. I don't know if it was the first possession. I think it was the first possession, but that looked like a bad drop, but it happened to be coming right at me. And the ball was like not really where Surratt would have wanted to catch it. And there was another ball, I think it was also in the first quarter, that was just on the wrong shoulder. So some of these are, I don't know if it's training wheels necessarily, but I think it is Mendoza dialing in where he needs to put the ball for each of these receivers. And I'll say, like, probably the biggest thing from that perspective, from the passing game perspective, that I was excited by was how dialed in he got as the game went along. I mean, you look back at the stats and it's like, well, gosh, he was 18-25 for 245 yards, and 4 of those completions were for touchdowns. And that's a great game regardless of what you're doing. And the fact that they were able to run some routes that got some clear busted coverage, that third touchdown by Surratt, the way they ran that and the way that they had the personnel out there, it just completely confused Kennesaw State's defense in the middle. Surratt was wide open. So there were some things I think we could take away in the totality of the game that perhaps we almost got prejudiced against coming to those conclusions because the first half did appear a little bit stodgy.
I hear that. I'm going off of what just not looking as crisp. The thing that I did like is when it did feel like Cignetti opened up the playbook a little bit more in this game and had a couple of plays that were different. And when he ran those, it's like the end around to Omar Cooper Jr. It's just like boom, 75-yard touchdown, one play. And he had a great run, but it's also like that play was, Omar wasn't touched for the first 28 yards. I mean, it's just a great play design. I think of, Surratt's second touchdown where, we're in the red zone, where last week, and we talked about this in Mitchell Page at the live show, it was more just like a feel. Like he took that as like that Cignetti wanted the team to just, we want you to score this way. And so we're going to run the same play over and over again. Whereas this week, it's like Elijah Surratt ran a nice little like run in, cut back, and then just went straight back. It's like he was wide open for a touchdown. And it's like, all right, that's probably a play they could have run last week against Old Dominion. They just didn't want to. And so you see it starting to open up. You mentioned the third touchdown by Surratt, another great play. So it did feel like there's a lot of the playbook that isn't being shown. And then we start showing it. It's like, oh, it really does look dynamic. So there's a world where you you run all of those plays at once, the offense looks very dynamic. And just some, great stats. Surratt, 3 touchdown day. That's awesome. And just got a joke. You're talking about Fernando Mendoza stat line. I mean, do we have a Mendoza battle? 3 for 3, 35 yards, 1 touchdown by Alberto? Like, just going off the stats. We got a quarterback battle. Totally kidding.
I had like 5 or 6 people be like, Alberto's ball looks a little bit better and sharper. Like, just pump the brakes, please. Okay. Yeah. I will say, Charlie Becker,
fan club hat for last year. Go for it.
Charlie Becker in the receiving corps. Congrats. First touchdown catch. Should have had one earlier. Got taken off the board off of one of the most ridiculous pass interference calls I think I've ever seen, especially when you watch it on replay. But we'll come back to that in a minute. But no, I'm happy with what I'm seeing out of the offense. And this is how I expected the progression of offensive play calling to go. You didn't want to show hardly anything that first week, and some of that was don't show anything, but some of it was also, as Mitchell Page talked about on the live show, let's make our guys go head-to-head against Old Dominion's line, and they learned some lessons from that, I think, because they looked better, granted, against a worse defensive line today, but you also add in some more wrinkles because now that Omar Cooper play is on film, and it went for a touchdown, and that's something that defensive coordinators on opposing teams are going to have to account for.
Right.
And you ran it against an FBS team. Like, you didn't run it against an FCS opponent next weekend. And so now you're giving opponents some additional things to think about, specifically talking about Illinois and Iowa here. So I like the items that were sprinkled in by Mike Shanahan. I thought that was a good approach overall. And then the running attack, as was being talked about overall, I mean, Hooperazzi noting the running game's flying under the radar, 3 guys racking up numbers. I had this tweet yesterday. This was the first, so these 2 games that IU has played in these first 2 weeks of the season against Old Dominion and against Kennesaw State, both of those games now, they've rushed for over 300 yards. You have to go back to the Maryland game in 2016 to find the last time that Indiana rushed for 300 or more yards against an FBS opponent. And they rushed for 414 yards. Now, that was Jordan Howard, who was a cyborg. But the fact that it's been that long, and the fact that Indiana has been able, over the course of 120 minutes, to rack up over 600 yards of rushing, and they really haven't had a bell cow back doing that. It's been spread across the 3 primaries pretty well, so far. I mean, up on the season, Roman Hemby averaging 5.5 yards a carry, 32 carries, 175 yards. Lee Beebe, who kind of got talked about the least coming in, 22 carries, 163 yards, a 7.4 yard per carry average, and a touchdown. Kalon Black, 27 carries, 149 yards, 5.5 yards a carry. And then you got to throw in, like, Omar Cooper just rushed for a touchdown. Fernando Mendoza has not only rushed for a touchdown, but has 5.9 yards per carry when he's run the ball. So this is positive. Like, this is something, as much as the R part of RPO last year got buried under the touchdown passes, running the ball looks like it could be a particular strength, especially when you look at the grading. Khalil Benson, kind of shaky in pass protection. He's been real good in run blocking so far. And really, the whole offensive line has looked pretty good in run blocking up to this point.
Yep. No. I mean, totally agree. And this is something where, last year you had kind of a similar situation with Ellison and Lawton, but now you're adding Black to that. You have 3 guys doing it, because last year Ellison and Lawson averaged 65 yards a game, 51 yards a game. They both have, 5.3 and 4.7 yards a carry. But now you have 3 guys all over 5.5 yards a carry. And between Hemby, Beebe, and Black, you're going 87, 81, 74 yards per game. Small sample size, but it's still, those are really, really good numbers. And it shows that Cignetti has 3 backs to play with, and he does well. And the design runs, that's what I think is different here. Is last year was a lot of RPO look, so you're getting a lot of runs out of an RPO. Yeah. These are designed runs. So it means that the blocking is set up, and guys are, a lot of these BB, and they're not getting touched for the first 3 or 4 yards.
Yeah, exactly. And look, Indiana is not liable to continue to rush with this level of efficiency, although they probably will next week, because I've just the wildest suspicion that Indiana State might not be the most stout defensive team in terms of running the ball. or keeping teams from running the ball. But I'm happy that Indiana has been able to do so much on the ground. Those are habits that get built, and people, teams just in general, I think they start to believe that that is part of their overall identity. And the fact that it's been more by committee is really great to see as far as I'm concerned. So all things considered, when you look across the country and you look at what everybody's doing on things, obviously it's very early to figure out exactly who's doing what. But as of right now, Indiana leads the Big Ten in rushing yards per game at 311. Only Washington is above 300 yards per game. And I think the only other teams that are above 250 are Oregon and USC. And right now, those are amongst the best offensive teams, according to S&P Plus, in the country. Like USC is rated as the number one offense in the country. Oregon's rated at like number 2 or number 3. So this is good. And that means, there's growth to come in the passing game as well. And it's just an interesting look right now for Indiana. They've been able to do so much on the ground. It's going to have to be part of what they do moving forward as well. And that's a good thing.
The only thing I want to throw out there, and we had the boys with us, so we were kind of walking around. I think it was in the second quarter. There was a play where we were like in field goal range, and then we went back, and then we ended up going for it on 4th down. But I was listening to Fisher talk about it, how it happened a couple times last year, where Radicic, it's like when they get over 40 yards, it's almost like they're scared to let him kick, but it feels like he has the leg. I'm curious what's, just throwing it out there as a point of just interest. Like, I'm curious what's going out, because I think he has the leg, and it feels like there have been times where it's like, just give him the opportunity to get some practice kicking in real game situations, and then they go for it.
So there was a quote that I saw, and I forget who it was that tweeted it, but it was off of the television broadcast. And they had interviewed Cignetti at halftime, and he said that, essentially he let his emotions get the best of him by going for it on that 4th down rather than kicking the field goal.
Okay.
So, and it's funny because John Kaluter, who was watching the game with me, was really upset they hadn't done exactly what you just said, which is give him some game reps. I still debate whether game reps are really needed when it comes to kicking, because kicking is kicking. Like, you can hit field goals on the practice field. It doesn't really make that much of a difference where you're doing it. But I am a little concerned about the field goal kicking right now with IU, in that they don't seem like they totally trust Radicic, and the other guy, there seems to be a hard limit on where you're going to be able to see Indiana effectively kick field goals. It's probably in that 50-yard mark. I do think the wind might have played a factor. It was a little bit breezy, and it was coming at Indiana for that particular play you're talking about in the second quarter. So who knows? It's one of those things where it would be nice to see them attempt some things, but I also just think right now they're less worried about the field goal kicking and more worried about continuing to move the ball and figure out ways to get things done on offense. And they'd rather have the 4th and intermediate practice in the opposing team's end, especially if you're going to win the game by a pretty significant margin, which I think they figured out at that point. I'd rather get those reps in a game at this point than get field goal reps. But all that said, I do wonder how much confidence there actually is right now in the field goal team. There may be tons. I just wonder, because you just get the sense there's not as much as you'd like at this point.
Yeah.
Defensively, so there's the big piece, and there was actually a question here from IU grad Mark: are giving up chunk plays a major concern? And so that was the complaint for Indiana's defense in this game. And again, it's one of those things where you're, to some degree, I don't know if you're picking nits. You look at the way that the yardage and the team stats looked at the end of this game. Kennesaw State had 271 total yards, 182 yards in the passing game, 89 yards in the rushing game. It was a really good defensive performance by this Indiana team throughout, but they did give up what you would call, chunk plays or explosive plays on a few occasions, which skewed the stats a little bit, and people were worried about that. They had a 26-yard completion, a 24-yard completion, and a 20-yard completion. Those don't seem, a 38-yard, a 32-yard, and a 21-yard. The longs that I just mentioned were the running plays that they gave up. So they really had, 6 plays where they gave up a significant amount of yardage. That's about all that they gave up, though. And it didn't yield a touchdown. They had one play that would have been a bigger play, but There ended up being a strip fumble recovered by Indiana in that mix. And meanwhile, when you look at how Indiana played overall from a defensive perspective, they still ended up with 2 sacks. They had 14 tackles for loss. They turned them over twice. It was another really good defensive performance overall. And yes, I think to answer the question, giving up explosive plays or chunk plays is a concern. And I do think there's some grading. If you look at PFF grades, which I know most of you don't have access to, there is some grading concern I'm seeing in the Indiana secondary already with a couple of guys as far as how they're grading out in terms of their coverage that is going to need to get worked out. But if all you're giving up is 6 or 7 explosive plays, but on the rest of the plays that you're facing defensively, you're really grinding the opposition into dust, I'll take that. And I think anybody would take that, because as long as those explosive plays aren't leading directly to touchdowns, you're putting yourself in a long-term really good spot. And that's kind of what I've seen out of Indiana so far. It feels like they will bend even on those longer plays, but they're able to get stout pretty quickly after it happens.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't give up a touchdown against Kennesaw State, and you didn't really give up a touchdown drive against Old Dominion. You're parsing words here, but it's like those 2 plays, 2 broken plays that were all the points for Old Dominion. But I am with you when you look at the Big Ten, and not all competition is created equal here. But when you look at the Big Ten, Indiana is 16th in yards per play on the defensive side giving up. So we're giving up an average of 5.9 yards per play on defense, which is not ideal. And it's not great because we haven't played the best opponents in the Big Ten. The only teams worse than us right now are UCLA and Rutgers. Minnesota's numbers are like skewed insane because they're averaging only giving up 90 yards a game, like 2.3 yards a play, but whatever. But, even when you go total yards, we're 10th in the Big Ten. We've given up 585, yards per game on average. We are 10th in the Big Ten. So it's not ideal. Like it would be nice to see those yardage numbers tighten up a little bit. Again, if you take out 3 of those chunk plays, we're probably in the top 5 of the Big Ten, but those plays happened. They're real plays, but it's like, I think it just depends on how you look at this. Is like, can we solve those chunk play problems? And in a way we did, because Old Dominion had 2 that went for touchdowns. Kennesaw State had some. None of them went for touchdowns. So it's like you could see it starting to get tightened up. I think, this is kind of becoming my refrain for this week and next week is I think depending on the result for Illinois is not the end-all be-all, but what happens in that game, I think, will add a lot of context to what we look at here. So if we lose to Illinois and there's a couple of big plays, the defense doesn't stack up, you can look back and be like, all right, well, this was a problem that we kind of saw brewing, that we're giving up a lot of yards, and you could kind of justify it away with big plays and there's 1 or 2 plays here or there, but it's like that was a problem. Or if you beat Illinois, you look back and it's like, all right, this is a team that had a couple of early season struggles and they're starting to figure it out. And so in a way, it's like Illinois is going to answer a lot of these questions and help us understand, are we justifying away a problem or are we solving the problem?
Well, of course, yes. I mean, yeah. I agree with you. It's one of those deals, though, where I think you got to be a little cautious. If you take the first 2 non-con games last year that Indiana played against FBS competition, it's, you can draw some parallels, as we talked about, between the FIU game and the Indiana game last year. That game, in terms of how the teams played against each other, what was interesting was that FIU didn't have a ton of explosive plays. I think they had 1 carry that went for 23 yards, but they didn't have a lot of mistakes, and Indiana kind of struggled to keep them from just steadily gaining yardage in that game. And then Indiana's offense was a little bit mired in things as well. When you look at the Charlotte game, Charlotte did gash them for a few explosive plays in that one. They had a 33-yard run. Henry Rutledge had that early on in the game. Isaiah Myers had a 25-yard touchdown catch. Jarris Mack had a 19-yard catch. So those did not end up being problems for Indiana as you move forward in that season. I am really fascinated to see how Indiana plays in a game against a Big Ten opponent, obviously. So we will put a pin in the things that you're talking about here. But again, I think just going apples to apples off of the same 2 types of games that happened last year, I'm not as concerned about this being some kind of latent issue. to me, like the big issues with the secondary are issues we already knew about. And we're already concerned about. And if you were going to point to something, as we talked about in some of the preseason pods, that might be problematic, a lot of it came down to this idea of, is the secondary deep enough? And of course, you've got a big question mark, which we talked about during the live show, which was, what's going to happen with Lewis Moore? How does that court case go? As Hooperazzi mentions in the chat there, as there's a deposition happening on Monday, there may be some resolution on that this week. And, Moore has been a pretty stalwart figure back there so far in what is not a terribly deep positional group. Byron Baldwin didn't play again this week. So
what's your feel? Like, do you know?
I have zero feel for this. I really I could, any projection I might give on what the judge is going to do is predicated on just what has happened in other cases, but the cases are not very consistent in terms of what we've seen courts decide to rule. So I'm almost afraid to say anything because I'm pretty sure I'll be wrong either way.
And that is that this week? I mean, because he can't. He's done after
the restraining order was 2 weeks, and so those 2 games have happened.
So theoretically, they should make a decision now before the next week.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But that's essentially. It was always like, you're going to get through these first 2 games, you're going to have them on the field. Then what happens? And so we will see what occurs and keep an eye on that, obviously, as we move forward.
We're in then what happens territory. The other thing on the defensive side that I saw that, it kind of picked up in that third quarter was Kamara. I noticed this in the first game. I was watching him a lot in the second game. His tackle numbers are not great, but I saw it a lot in the first game in the first half of Kennesaw State, where it's like, I think he really was missing CJ West on the line, because having the 2 of them together, it's like most offensive lines couldn't figure out both of them. And one of them was always getting kind of a shot at the quarterback or just getting a lot of pressure. And it felt like this was the first, this first game and a half was like Kamara trying to figure out like, oh, I'm the main guy on this line that everyone's going to try and stop me. Like, how do I get there? And right after that fumble in the third quarter, I saw Kamara get more and more and deeper and better pressure. And it feels like he's starting to figure out how to work the line without having a CJ. I mean, he's got other people with him, but like without having a tandem partner like CJ West. And so I think we're going to see him continue to become more impactful as the next couple weeks go.
I mean, it's also, and I was talking with Taylor Lehman about this on text, in that part of the issue with Kamara is that he's not really, I think, the most ideal for the position that he's currently out there playing. And some of that is because, he's probably not like purely in that stud role. And it's been interesting because like Kellen Wyatt, who came in from Maryland, the transfer from Maryland, has been really impressive. Actually led IU in tackles yesterday. He's one of the 2 most confusingly numbered players on the field. He wears number 13, as does Elijah Surratt. We got to stop this, guys. We got to come up with, you're going to have key players on both sides of the ball, because I've had 5 or 6 people come up to me in the stands like, why is Surratt playing on defense? Like, it's not what's happening. It's like Radicic having Fernando Mendoza's number, and it's like, wow, Mendoza's really multi-talented. That's not how it's actually working.
It's got some good pep on the ball when he's warming up.
But I do think that it's going to be a little unsettled. They've clearly got a lot of talent on that D line. Kamara in a quiet game still had a sack and 2 tackles for loss yesterday. I'm sure he'll continue to contribute. I just think there's going to have to be some shuffling around, and certainly not having CJ West out there, even though Hosea Wheeler is a really nice addition to the defensive line. It's just a different look. But this is why you play these games the way that you do early, to try to establish positional rhythm between players and figure out who makes the most sense out there at various times. So it's a good observation on your part. If you look through the statistics, other notes from a statistical perspective, first of all, was pretty concerned about Omar Cooper, who came off the field, looked injured, like threw his helmet coming off the field in the second quarter, went straight to the locker room. Fortunate that he came back, and he had 2 really explosive plays. He had a 40-yard catch, his only catch of the game, but a really nice one. And then, of course, the 75-yard touchdown run. Like that, Cooper is going to be such a fascinating figure to watch, because it's clear that Mendoza knows he can go to him. And it was great to see him haul the 40-yarder in. especially after the drop that happened last week, which, I'm not expecting that to happen all the time. It was great to see Elijah Surratt, after basically a game of everybody wondering, like, what's the deal, catch 9 balls for 97 yards, get the 3 touchdowns. Charlie Becker with 2 catches was nice to see, as I mentioned earlier. They got a bunch of people involved. I think the biggest surprise to me thus far has been and then again, this is maybe an artifact of the way that they've decided to approach things offensively. They're really not using the tight ends in the pass game at all. Like Holden Stays, who we assumed was going to be the pass catching tight end alongside Nowakowski's blocking. They've used tight ends a ton. Like Taylor texted something out earlier today that was interesting. Indiana's 35th among FBS offenses in tight end snaps, as they've had them out there a ton on run blocking, but they haven't really used them in the passing game. And I think you can make an argument Nowakowski's actually been a more consistently looked for player right now than Stays has. So that is a little bit of an interesting thing, but they've gotten a ton of wide receivers involved, and they've also gotten some good running back involvement as well. Roman Hemby caught a ball for 25 yards in this game. The passing game continues to be a curiosity for me, and I'm interested to see how that continues to play out.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Do you think we're going to stay in this kind of slower huddle offense? Because last year was a lot of no huddle and just seemed like a faster pace and kind of a real like aggressive offense. Thus far, this offense feels just a little bit more conventional in the way they're playing it from a timing and huddling perspective.
I don't think that they'll stay the same as they have up to this point. I think that is an artifact of the teams they're playing. And the idea that, just dominate them in time of possession. You'll be able to you need to learn how to move the ball down the field in those types of games. You need to be able to practice that. And you've got a running attack that's able to chew up a lot of clock. Like, why rush at that point? I think when they get to playing some more talented defenses, you'll probably see more no huddle, but I still think it's going to be a little bit of a slower pace than it was last year.
Okay.
So before we,
sorry, the last thing I wanted to hit was just real quick. It got me, like, Omar Cooper Jr. is electric when he's on the field. Like, watching him with the end around, like his routes, like he's got another gear. BB has some of that, but I also just want to reach out another week. Jonathan Brady on punt returns, like almost broke one, but had a 35-yard punt return. I was trying to think, when was the last time we had a punt returner go back-to-back weeks with a touchdown? We didn't, but we almost had it. But I mean, he had the 91-yard touchdown last week, a 35-yard return this week, and it feels like we're getting into don't kick to Brady territory. I mean, he's really electric as a punt returner.
I agree. I mean, there's been it's funny, like we criticized a little bit the field goal team, and not criticized, but it feels like there's a little bit of a lack of trust there. Right. But the return teams look real good. Punting looks fine. You haven't seen a whole lot of it so far. The kickoffs have looked good, and we talked about that being something that they wanted to improve upon, and they brought a guy in to do that. So special teams has looked good. I think special teams is top 25 right now in S&P Plus. And yeah, Brady looks like a tremendous addition there. And it makes it so that he doesn't have to contribute as much on the offensive side of things, because there's a clear top 3, it looks like, in their receivers, right, with Surratt, Cooper, and EJ Williams. The question was always, how are they going to use Omar Cooper, and how are they going to integrate EJ Williams? Was he going to be ready given everything that had happened the last couple of years with injury? So, between that and Charlie Becker being on the margins there and getting some opportunities, and LeBron Bond getting another catch, he's got 2 catches in 2 consecutive games. I like the build that's happening there right now in terms of special teams as it relates to the receiving room. It's like a nice mix of people.
Yep.
Before we move on to some broader topics, we have a giveaway for those who are listening in. We'll do the giveaway. I think we'll make the official announcement on who wins the giveaway. Maybe we'll do the announcement on Crimson Cash later on this week. How about that?
We do radio thing, like 9th caller. We got 9 callers in to win the 99.9. Yeah.
We're not going to do that, but I will. What we're doing is giving away a pair of tickets to the Colin Jost show that's going to be happening on Sunday, the 21st of September. That will be at the IU Auditorium. Of course, Colin Jost, Saturday Night Live star, co-anchor of Weekend Update. He'll be coming for a night of stand-up comedy, September 21st, 7 p.m. Of course, tickets in general available at iuauditorium.com. That event is going to wrap up what they're calling IU Family Weekend, which, of course, includes the Illinois game that's going to be happening at some point on Saturday. We don't know when yet. We're going to talk about that in the second half of the show. But then, of course, we'll have the SNL, or Colin Jost from SNL at the IU Auditorium. So 2 tickets available, and we're going to be giving them away. If you would like to enter, you need to do 2 things. One, and no, Tony asking the question I would have asked, will his wife be in attendance? I doubt it. Of course, he's married to Scarlett Johansson.
We can't commit that she'll be there, but I mean,
it's not a non-zero. Yeah,
I mean, that's a place she could be.
Maybe she's had a long-standing desire to come to Bloomington. You never know.
And I'll say this, if you win the tickets, throw it out on Twitter. Like, hey, Scarlett, like, I have an extra ticket to the show. If you can't get one, I'm a winner already. I won them on CrimsonCast.
To win the tickets, you need to do the following. You need to be a free subscriber minimum to the Substack. So go to crimsoncast.substack.com, and you can sign up for free, as you all know. And there is, of course, a paid option if you want to help support the show, but we're not asking for that. You have to be a minimum free subscriber, and then you need to, let's say, comment on the Substack post for this episode. So this episode will come out later on Sunday. All you need to do is be a free subscriber, comment on the Substack post itself, and
with your email address, just say Colin Jost.
Well, you don't even need your email address because we can get that from your subscription on the Substack. So do that between now and Thursday. And Scott and
comment with Scarlett Johansson. Just the word Scarlett Johansson.
Do not do that. But just comment on the post in some way, even if it's like, just commenting for the Colin Jost tickets. That's totally fine. But we'll announce the winner on Thursday of this week, and of course the show is on the 21st of September. So, and to answer Hooperazzi's question, yes, of course, Scarlett Johansson is invited to my tailgate. That's a standing invite, and I'm sure she'll.
Cameron Diaz, she's always invited.
I'm positive she's just ready to take advantage of that offer and come and visit us on the show. So yes, that's exactly what's occurring.
So we will on Crimson Cash with me and James on Wednesday, Thursday. We will announce the winners.
That's absolutely right. So go ahead and sign up, do that. And if you're listening afterwards, you still got time. You just got to go crimsoncast.substack.com, do the free subscription, leave a comment on this, and you can win yourself 2 tickets to Colin Jost at the IU Auditorium on the 21st. We'll be back right after this with more Crimson Cast. Stick with us.
When the final buzzer sounds in Bloomington, the conversation starts here. The assembly call is IU basketball. Live post-game shows, smart midweek breakdowns, and no empty hot takes. Jared Morris, Coach Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, and Ryan Phillips dissect lineups, sets, and recruiting so you know what really happened and what it means for the Big Ten season, March, and beyond. Join the live chat on YouTube, then catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Just search Assembly Call and be part of Hoosier Nation's most trusted post-game tradition.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast as we go into the part 2 of the show here and talk about some of the questions and other thoughts that you folks sent us. So one of the things I wanted to bring up, this was a funny one. So there was a question in the post-game press conference that someone asked Curt Cignetti. I think it was Dalton James from Student Media, asked him like if Cignetti felt relieved on the sidelines with his team continuing to play hard at the end of a game that they'd clearly won. And Cignetti made the comment, hey, I'm never relieved on the field. I'll be relieved when I go up to my office and crack open a beer. It's a great soundbite. But my question for you, Scott, and for the folks who are watching us live, it got me thinking, what kind of beer do you think Curt Cignetti has in his office to crack open after a win? This feels like a personality test to some degree. But I'm curious, like assuming Kurt's got a cooler or like a mini fridge up there with a couple of cold ones ready to go after a game. What beer do you think he would have in his fridge that he would crack open after a victory?
That's a great question. I mean, I can tell you what it's not. It doesn't feel like it's Guinness or Blue Moon. Like it feels, those feel out of it. Like maybe Yinling, possibly. But I mean, he was in Alabama for a while, like in Virginia.
We had a Yingling, up on offer. That was It's one of our
maybe like just has a bunch of old Rolling Rock. Just he has
that was going to be my guess, because my thinking was this: like Signetti does not strike me as an IPA drinker.
Correct, and I don't see him as like the low end like Keystone Busch Light or like, and I don't see him as standard like Miller Lite, Bud Light. Like that's too typical.
And I get and Rolling Rock's fallen way off, obviously, since 25 years ago.
Still in production, like.
I think it is. I believe it's still in production.
Seen Rolling Rock in forever.
They for a while they were marketing it like in the 40 packs with like, you know, PBR comes in 40 packs and Rolling Rock comes in 40 packs, and you really know you've entered a lower threshold as a beer. But I think it's important.
We have advertising spots open, Rolling Rock. If you want some primetime advertising right here.
But my thought is Rolling Rock was like a legitimate option as a beer 25, 30 years ago. Like you, as a college kid, like you felt like buying Rolling Rock in the 90s or early 2000s, like you weren't completely selling your soul as you would if you were buying like Natural Light or something like that. So I could see that. I could see like an Iron City beer as a possibility. So there's some potential options there, but it did get me thinking. You know, the Justin Doherty said game day lager. I mean, that would be the reasonable one in the iconic candy stripe can, right? But that's a question I want to try to get answered. I'm going to see if I can get our sources to let us know. This is assuming he even has beer in his office. He may have just been joking. So
it's possible. I also don't see him doing seltzers. I don't see him like cracking open a High Noon or something.
Yeah, no, that's no. Although people say that about me, and I love some of the high noonish kinds of things now. I've migrated a little bit.
Welcome aboard. Hey, good to get on board.
What are you talking about? Like you're doing winery tours and things like that.
Yeah, I mean seltzers were 5 years ago. You'll get to me. You'll catch up.
You just got like canned Sauv Blanc in your luxury box that you watch the game from, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, let's answer a couple of other questions. We had a question online about, did we feel like things got fixed in this Kennesaw State game from what we saw in the Old Dominion game? So let me ask you that real quick. We talked about the individual statistical things. We talked about, you know, some of the things you still weren't happy about, but was your feeling that things got fixed, so to speak, from what the perception was last week? Or do you feel like there wasn't as much to fix as perhaps we thought coming out of that game?
I would say I don't think things got fixed, but this isn't like a sound the alarm, I think we're in trouble. It feels like we're in the process of fixing, and it's continuing to get fixed. Like I said, there was just a 5 or 6 throws here or there. Like I go back to that Surratt one that I think you mentioned, like the back shoulder where he was open, like it was a window where you had to throw it to the far back shoulder. I feel like a pass that Curtis Rourke was making pretty much from day one last year that Mendoza didn't. Whatever. That's a really tough throw. It's like you're talking about 6 inches one way or the other. But so to me, it still feels like we are trying to dial it in and get all of the timing right in the passing game. It's also, so I would say, no, it doesn't feel like it's fixed. I would say it feels like we're fixing things. We're getting better. I'm not in sound the alarm. I'm not concerned, but I would say, no, I think it still feels like we're a work in progress. But if you would say, like, do things look better than they did against Old Dominion? Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the question from Pitt Hoosier was, does anything in the first 2 games change your big picture feelings about the team? If it sometimes feels a little bit off, which you kind of said in your opening salvo, but at the same time, these 2 games have gone almost exactly the way the first 2 games went last year. So I get that, and I have thought about that a little bit. Like, do I feel different now about the ceiling for this team? The more I come back to my thoughts, I don't feel that terribly different about the ceiling, in part because of what I'm seeing elsewhere with the teams that are on Indiana's schedule. And this is where it gets a little bit difficult to figure out, like, you're really kind of metering out, okay, how is this team playing? Do we think that they're actually in the same general ballpark of how good they were last year? So is this a team that, last year's team probably could have plausibly won anywhere between 8 and 12 games, and they won 11. This year's team, I think we felt like the plausible spread was probably between 8 and 11 games. It seemed unlikely they were going to go undefeated. So do you still feel like they fall within those parameters? Do you feel like they're more on the high end? But I think you also have to look at the evidence of what goes on elsewhere in college football. And what we've seen thus far, from my perspective, is to some degree what our commenter has here: IU football passing the eyeball test these last 2 weeks, regardless of stat line. Like I feel like they've passed the eyeball test for me. It was everything but the finish in the Old Dominion game. It was everything and the finishes in the Kennesaw State game. And then you look across the country or at least across the conference, and you look at the teams that are on Indiana's schedule. It's like, who knows with Purdue? They didn't cover against Southern Illinois last night, but I would say Indiana is still significantly better than Purdue. UCLA looks real bad, and Indiana gets them at home. Michigan State looks pretty shaky. Indiana gets them at home. My feelings haven't changed on any of those. We knew Oregon was damn good, and my feeling haven't changed on that game. Penn State, I feel like Indiana may have a little bit better shot against Penn State than what we thought at the beginning of the year, because they've won games, but they've played two really bad teams, and they've looked kind of pedestrian on offense doing it. Wisconsin, I think, is better than perhaps we thought, but not very good at the same time. Iowa looks worse than we thought they were going to be.
And their offense is exactly what we expect for an Iowa offense. Like, I'm not worried about getting outscored by Iowa. And
Maryland looks real bad. Like, Maryland has statistically struggled. They're not even averaging 100 yards per rush or per game right now rushing. So that's how I've tried to break it down in my head. It's like Indiana might not be quite as good on the high end, but they might be better, because I see things in this offense in terms of their executional ability, where I think this team has a higher ceiling offensively than they had last year if everything clicks. They probably have a lower ceiling defensively than last year, but that doesn't mean that they won't be able to play well enough in games if the offense can score.
Right.
So yeah, that's where I guess, from my perspective, in terms of red flags, I'm not seeing a ton of them. I'm just seeing a different team right now than I saw last year, and I'm trying to adapt to that. I don't know. What are your thoughts right now?
No, I agree with all of that, and I think looking at the opponents we're playing is a logical way to look at it. The other thing, kind of tangential to the question, but I was thinking about was, similarly how we're just taking that Iowa game, and it's like half of the discussion is like, man, it's tough to play at Kinnick. Like, it's just a tough place to play, which it is. Not denying that, but this season, I think something that's not being talked about enough that I think is a real goal for this season is, can you win all the games at home at Memorial Stadium? That would be back-to-back years you go undefeated at home. And, can you start building that part where fans from, team Maryland, Michigan State, teams like that start looking at like, man, we got to go to Bloomington. And it's like, well, I don't know what Indiana is, but that's a tough place to go and win. Like, can you start building that? And can you make that a place where you can go, 7-0, 8-0 year in, year out? And I think you look at the schedule of the teams we're playing in Memorial Stadium, I think we're really good there. So I look at it that way. And I think that's another benchmark of like, can we get to a point where we're only losing one game every 2 or 3 years at home? And maybe it's a fluke. Maybe it's where you're playing a number one team, or, Ohio State. So I look at it that way, but no, it hasn't changed my overall outlook, because, I think we're going to match up well with Illinois. We play that game at home. All the other teams we talked about have a lot of issues, probably more than we do. And then it's like, Oregon's really good. That hasn't changed. Yeah. And I think we can still beat Penn State there, but like that's a real kind of just, I believe in the vibe. And it's like, that game's in, 7 weeks. So we have or 8 weeks. We have a lot of times to get things figured out.
We had a couple of specific questions in the chat here about the games coming up. David asks, given Iowa's performance so far, are you feeling better about the upcoming away game with Iowa? So I'm feeling better about it, but I still think that's going to be a tough game, in as much as, Iowa's offense is bad. Like, and it's one of those things where that's just part of the meta build of Iowa at this point. I think what's been shocking is, because normally their defense makes up for it. And look, as poorly as they played offensively in that game against Iowa State, I think it's important to remember, it was a road game. They were playing, in Ames, and Iowa State's just been the better of the two programs over the course of the last several years. And they held Iowa State to 238 total yards of offense. They only accrued 214 yards themselves, and that's a big red flag. But Iowa did Iowa their way to a win in that game, or at least got it to overtime by just grinding the game to a halt. And so what I think of that game right now is I think Indiana's got the ability to rack up some explosive plays against Iowa's defense. I think they're going to have to. What I'm really interested in, though, and where I'm getting a little more confident, and I might eat my words on this, we'll see, is Indiana offensively, I feel like might be able to go toe to toe with Iowa's defensive line, at least in the running game. And I think that's where you're going to have to win this game, because Iowa's going to do a good job of pressuring you in terms of your passing. I mean, Iowa State only averaged 5 yards per pass. They were 18 for 27. They threw for 134 yards. It's going to be hard to pass against Iowa. It always is. But I think if Indiana can run the ball, Iowa State won that game with a 3.5 yards per rush, average. If Indiana can get that to 4.5, then I like their chances. And I think that the offensive line might be good enough for them to do that, at least in run blocking. So I'm more optimistic because it just doesn't look like Iowa's going to get a bunch, offensively on their own. And this kind of goes back to that comment that someone made earlier about how Indiana might have to win games this year. This is a game where they're going to have to put at least 24 points on the board, I think, to win. But I think Indiana's got the offensive ability to do that in the type of game that they'd have to play against Iowa to do that kind of thing in Kinnick.
Yeah.
We also had a question.
Can I go to a question real quick? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Let me do this question from Chad real quick, because it was a similar vein, which was, are you more or less confident beating Illinois, seeing how both teams have begun the season? So this is an interesting one, because this blends into the rankings and the ratings that have come out this week. So the new FPI came out this morning, and of course that's ESPN's power ranking. And as much as it's gotten dogpiled for overrating the SEC, a lot of that is statistical noise from last year. What was interesting is that Indiana jumped 14 spots in FPI this week, from week 1 to week 2. They're up to 16th, so they jumped 14 spots. And in FPI, at least, they are, 8 spots ahead of Illinois at this point. In S&P Plus, Indiana and Illinois are, I think, 16th and 17th. They're very close to each other. So with Illinois, I throw out the FCS game, just like I will throw out Indiana's game against Indiana State as being any kind of a meaningful statistical marker. The win against Duke was an interesting one. On the one hand, anytime you can win by that many points on the road against a power conference opponent, it's impressive. On the other hand, I'm not really certain that Duke is a particularly good football team. And right now, Duke is down at 64th in FPI, and Duke, I think, is in the 60s as well in S&P Plus. And I think with Illinois, it's that might be a harder team to peg in terms of how good they actually are. They clearly are going to rely heavily on Luke Altmaier's arm, and he played a very good game at Duke. 3 touchdowns, 22 of 31, threw for almost 300 yards. They got a great receiving game out of Hank Beatty. They didn't do as well on the ground. They only ran for 2.9 yards a carry in that game. They did have 3 touchdowns, but the running game wasn't quite there for them. They got torn up a bit by Duke in the passing game. They allowed 356 yards passing. So I think Indiana is significantly better than Duke. I think Indiana can go against them blow for blow on both sides of the ball. I feel about the same regarding that game that I felt at the beginning of the season. I haven't seen a ton of evidence that would have moved me one way or the other than I feel like Indiana can do more offensively to hurt Duke, to hurt Illinois on the ground than Duke was able to. So I think it's going to be a much stouter test. I still like Indiana in that game. I don't know what your thoughts are at this point, though.
Same. It's not been updated for week 2, but FEI is another ranking system, kind of like a Ken Pom for football. Indiana was ranked 16th coming into this week. Illinois was 37th. Small sample size, but it's like there's a wide variance there. And Indiana, just their metrics come in better than Illinois. The only thing that's different is Illinois started the season ranked higher. And again, this whole idea like that matters because they just keep moving up. I'm like you, nothing has changed. And actually, now that we're in the thick of it, I kind of like the way the schedule's breaking for Indiana, that we now get our easiest opponent a Friday night. So you get an extra day of rest. Illinois is playing on Saturday. I mean, they're playing Western Michigan, which is a should be a win, but like that's one of those kind of sneaky MAC teams that have given they give teams problems way more than Indiana State's going to give Indiana problems, I would assume. So I do like that Indiana should be able to kind of take a breath, beat Indiana State, get an extra day of rest, and then not have to travel. And so it does feel like a lot of things are lining up to that. My question was surrounding this game as well. I was just, we don't have a game time yet. We can probably play the what time do you think the game's going to be?
Well,
but just
we're going next to that, actually.
Okay, but I want to say this. This is probably one of those you're going to roll your eyes like, hey, it is what it is. But it's like it's just rude. Like it is just really rude that they cannot figure out game times earlier. I mean, you know what's happening. The NFL sets most of their schedule. The NBA just sets their schedule. Like we have game times in March and April. Now, granted, maybe that doesn't put the best games in the best times, but college basketball sets their times, and sometimes they'll have a couple games like 1:30 to 3:30. It's just rude to the fans to be like always a week and a half out of like it's a massive difference for people's planning if you're talking a noon game or a 7:00 game. Just that would be my one thing. Obviously, college football has a lot of problems. They're not listening to us, but it's like set your times 5 weeks out. This is insane that we are less than 14 days out. Yes, Hooperazzi, the wine crowd, we're pissed. We're going to be throwing Merlot everywhere. It's Merlot up in the air. No, we have to plan.
Can you do Shiraz? I mean, because who drinks Shiraz, really?
It's for me into like a political speech here. It's for the everyman. No, but seriously, they should have time set way earlier. This every 2 weeks out it's rude to the fans. So bad on you, college football.
Vote Caulfield 2026.
Caulfield 2026. Yes.
So I don't disagree, but this is what happens when nobody's in charge of college football, or more to the point, the networks are in charge of college football.
Of course, they love just waiting to the last minute.
But this is where conferences need to be like kind of slapped around a little bit and say, have some respect for yourself. Set your own times. Like teams.
No, it's true. It's like it's a Big Ten game, and just be like, hey, we want this game to be a 7:00 game. Right. NBC, pick it up. Shut up.
Now, the flip side of that, though, and this is, I'm not trying to defend the networks, but the Big Ten has the dumbest scheduling principles on the planet when it comes to marketing its teams to television audiences. This is why, as much as it's rude, as you would say, to not have game time set. If we were still letting the Big Ten set all of these things by themselves, every game would start at noon. There would be no night games after like October 31st. You would not have Big Ten teams playing on Friday nights and things like that. Some people don't like those things, but they do have a very positive impact on people being able to see the games, be able to go, watch teams in different environments. And that's why there's no perfect solution. Unfortunately, it's one of those situations where, because the conferences have refused to think about their overall products as marketing strategies when it comes to college football, they've often ceded all this power to the networks. And the networks are like, well, we're going to wait to see who makes the most sense in what time slots. I don't love it, and it certainly is inconvenient for those of you coming in from out of town. But I'll also say this is a very Indiana-specific problem, which I'm going to get to when we address Mike Petrie's question from earlier. So hang on for that. But first, as far as this game in particular, because we did have several people ask, like, Patrick asked, when do we have an idea? I would put most of my money now on this game being a noon kick on the 20th. And here's why. If you look at the games now that are set up, a lot of people thought, well, Florida, Miami might be something that adjusts things. And that's more of a like, where does game day go kind of thing. But Florida losing that game to South Florida yesterday, I think gives the IU-Illinois game a real potential leg up on either big noon kickoff or game day. Probably not both, but I could certainly see a scenario where they decide, that maybe big noon kickoff goes somewhere else and maybe game day comes to Bloomington, because there aren't a lot of other great games that day.
So it's the ranked matchups. You have Florida at Miami, like you mentioned, Illinois at Indiana, which is 11-23. I'm looking down the list. Like
Texas Tech, Utah is the other one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe like SMU. I'm looking at other teams like have some cachet. Like SMU is at TCU.
But SMU is going to drop out of the polls this week, probably.
Yeah, Arizona State is at Baylor. Like those are both just name schools. Like South Carolina's at Missouri. I'm just going with names. Then maybe Oregon State at Oregon, but that's going to be a bloodbath. Like that's not a real good game.
Yeah, I would say, and I could see a scenario where Fox is like, well, so Fox just announced they're going to be at Northwestern next week for Big Noon kickoff.
Just coming down the road,
getting ready for Oregon Northwestern. It's pretty slim pickings this upcoming week in terms of available games. But I could see a scenario where they're like, well, we're going to go Big 12 next week and do Big Noon, the Big Noon kickoff show for Texas Tech, Utah, with the idea that then they would do that maybe game day does Indiana, Illinois. But I think regardless of that scenario, it looks pretty certain now that this is going to be a noon kick.
Do you feel confident that we're going to get either? I can't believe this sentence is going to be uttered. We're this confident, but do you feel pretty confident that game we will get either game day or Big Noon kickoff? Like that we will have one of them here. Is there a chance we have neither of them here?
I'd be shocked. I mean, I could see a scenario where game day decides to go to Columbia because you'll have South Carolina and what will probably be a ranked Missouri team by the time the polls open next week. Although weirdly, and we're going to get to the polls here in a second, weirdly, Missouri isn't even ranked in the coaches poll, which seems kind of bonkers to me after beating Kansas the way that they did yesterday. But I could see that scenario happening, and I could see Big Noon going somewhere else. But look, this is probably going to be the noon kickoff for Fox because right now there's nothing in that slot, and I don't see a lot else in Fox's stable that makes a ton of sense for that particular spot. Auburn, Oklahoma is another potential one. I think both of those teams will be ranked. When the AP poll might have just dropped, so I'm going to double check that. But I really think you're looking at one of those two shows coming, and then Indiana, Illinois being noon on Fox, which not my favorite, but at least you get the whole rest of the afternoon, hopefully to celebrate after Indiana wins that game. Weather should be really good. It'll be easier for the wine crowd because you'll be able to get to your vineyards or whatever by 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock that evening. So it'll be great for everybody.
The helipad will be open. So that's good.
The helipad. I love it. I thought that they were tearing that thing down to build a new soccer stadium. Anyway, let's talk about, did they not? You guys still have it? Good for you.
It's still there by Cambridge. Yeah. Yes, we still have it. Yes.
Anyway, let's talk about
polo grounds going downtown.
Let's talk about the rankings. AP poll just came out. And Indiana goes up one spot. So they are now 22nd in the AP poll. They move ahead of Michigan, who dropped 8 spots and is now 23rd. Now, I have no idea what Michigan's done to warrant being ranked at all, but other than just being Michigan, it's one of those things. But running down the rankings,
because they started the season ranked. He says with laughing.
They actually they did not look good in that Oklahoma game last night.
No.
They weren't that impressive against a really bad New Mexico team. I mean, everybody was like,
the reason they're ranked is because they started the season ranked 12th, which is based on what?
Yeah, everybody was like, ooh, Bryce Underwood. It's like they only won by 17 against a bottom 8th team in college football this year. But anyway, going through the rankings, it's Ohio State 1 in the AP poll, Penn State 2, LSU 3, Oregon 4, Miami 5. So you've got 3 Big Ten teams in the top 5, including 2 of Indiana's opponents on the road this year. That's not ideal. Georgia 6th. I would again ask, what has Georgia done to be ranked 6th at this point? But whatever. Texas 7th. I'd ask the same question. Notre Dame 8th. What is Notre Dame done? Notre Dame's done nothing. I don't even have Notre Dame ranked in my poll this week because
they lost and then took a week off.
Right. Illinois 9th. So you'll have at least one, probably only one top 10 team in that game. But that even more guarantees that you're likely to have the Big Noon kickoff, the actual Big Noon kickoff, not the show necessarily, but certainly the game. And then Florida State 10th, South Carolina 11th, Clemson 12th for some reason, Oklahoma 13th, Iowa State 14th, Tennessee 15th, A&M 16th, Ole Miss 17th, South Florida jumps all the way to 18th, Alabama 19th, Utah 20th, and then Texas Tech, Indiana, Michigan, Auburn, and Mizzou. That's your top 25 in the AP poll. Coaches poll was somewhat similar. Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, LSU, Oregon, Illinois 9th in that poll. Indiana 19th in the coaches poll. So a 3-position delta between those two teams. Michigan dropping to 22nd, South Florida 23rd, and for whatever reason, Missouri not in the poll at all, at least not in the top 25. So that's an interesting mix of things. I think you've got a lot of preseason bias still in these polls, as we witnessed with the various way that the people are ranked. But the key here is that Indiana didn't lose ground. They're still in relatively good shape overall in terms of what they're doing and when they're doing it. And they might go up 1 or 2 spots because you're liable to see a couple of teams potentially lose in front of them in this upcoming week. There aren't a ton of games with teams immediately in front of Indiana.
So I've been doing this week to week to our VIP subscribers. So I did one last week. I'll do one again this week.
Okay.
But just kind of going through every matchup for the teams above us. But you have 2 teams this week. A&M is playing at Notre Dame.
Yep.
Tennessee is hosting Georgia. So those are 2 teams that could and will probably theoretically lose. I had Florida this week is playing at LSU, so they're already behind us. They'll lose. I'm going to go through all of those matchups more in depth in our VIP subscriber, but check that out. But no, I think, sorry to cut you off and start talking here, but I think that gives Indiana a 2-spot jump. If those 2 things happen, which gets you like in the 17, 18 range. And what I think is interesting then is looking above it. It's like you have teams like Clemson and Alabama who have a loss ahead of you. If you beat Illinois, obviously Illinois is going to be behind you. You could just swap places with Illinois. Like, there's a world where Indiana just comes out of that Illinois game a top 10 team, because you're going to jump. Theoretically, you now need to be ahead of Clemson and Alabama because you're 4-0. You've done something, like you have a reason to jump them. You got to slate Illinois behind you. You probably jump a couple of those like Oklahoma A&M teams because your win against Illinois is better than Oklahoma's win against Michigan at that point. Like I could see a world where we could really skyrocket if we beat Illinois in the rankings.
So there's a couple of games that are of interest, I think, in terms of where Indiana's poll numbers will end up landing. So Tennessee is hosting Georgia. Tennessee losing that game probably isn't going to hurt them too much. If Georgia loses, it'll go rocket Tennessee up, obviously. But I am curious to see what happens in terms.
Will be above us.
Yeah, probably. But I'm curious how far above, and I'm curious. Does Tennessee end up getting punished at all if they lose big to Georgia, which is a possibility?
Which is so funny because we haven't talked about the Alabama thing. It's like they lose, and it's like the hard stop is like Indiana. Like, of course, it's like we're going to stop it. We're going to drop you above all the other teams. Like, not Indiana. Like,
right.
No, we'll keep you above Indiana by 1.
You've also got South Florida, who's, as we mentioned, now ranked. They're at Miami. If South Florida loses that game, do they fall out of the poll again? How does that all work? I'm interested to see what happens there. And the other one that I think is going to be kind of interesting to keep an eye on is what happens with Ole Miss's ranking. Ole Miss with an okay win at Kentucky. I didn't think they looked terribly impressive. So they're 5 spots ahead of Indiana. They host Arkansas. They got to win that one, obviously. And nothing Indiana does this week against Indiana State's going to help them positively in the poll. It's really just about who could fall back below them. That becomes the big question. So we'll keep an eye on all of that, obviously, but I think it's kind of an interesting scenario all the way around. This is why, though, you're mentioning of the scenario if Indiana beats Illinois in a couple of weeks, how they could jump up into the top 10. This is why being ranked going into the season is really, really important, because
if we were not ranked, that win would just get us in the top 25.
Right. And so that ends up being something to keep an eye on for IU. And it's where they need to come out and play really well against Indiana State. They need to win that game by significant margin. That's just the stakes that you've got right now. That's probably not going to be a problem because, again, Indiana State not very good. But we'll see what happens there. Last question we wanted to hit on this show. This is from our buddy Mike Petrie. Mike, thank you for coming down to the live show this weekend. Is IU football attendance and people leaving at halftime really something people care about? Or is it something people really only care about on Twitter? Why would I care whether people come to the game or if they stay or leave? So this became an issue with the first game this year, where Cignetti even mentioned kind of Riley in his post-game press conference. Like, it was a carbon copy of last year. It's like Groundhog Day. People left at halftime. Team didn't execute particularly well. This game, attendance was okay on the alumni side, and the students definitely were there for the first half. There were some open pockets over on the East Main, and then a bunch of people left at halftime, which was a shame because Indiana played a really entertaining second half, scored a bunch of points. It was a lot of fun being in the stadium. But this has become one of the big question marks about fan support and about how Indiana fans are approaching this football team. What are they owed? Or what is the football team owed? All of this stuff. It's an interesting set of combination of things, Scott, because ultimately there's a lot of different ways you could answer it. I'm going to let you take a crack at it first.
Yeah, I mean, so I was in Bloomington late Friday night. We had something with our kids in the morning, so we ended up coming about like 10-15 minutes late to the game. So I was listening to the start of the game, and Fisher and Buck Sewell were talking about this. Like, kind of a sparse crowd. It's like they're talking about it, and I have two thoughts on this. One is, at a high level, you and I have talked about the scheduling and kind of the soft scheduling, the reasons behind it, why it's necessary, why it's a good thing. So I'm not knocking it at all. But there is a piece here where it's like, we're not Alabama, we're not Ole Miss. We don't have a long history of selling out Memorial Stadium. You kind of can't have everything at the same time. Like, if you're going to schedule like this, people are just not going to show up the same as if we had, Bill Belichick in North Carolina coming in. It's the truth. Or, if you had Alabama coming in last week, it's like, that would have been a different crowd. So part of me is like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, you can't schedule low level opponents that we know all we're talking about is the style of win. But as somebody who goes to games as a fan, like, I'm tired of this ad nauseum. It's like the fans will show up, we'll be there for Big Ten games. And there's this mythical idea that like teams just sell out everything. Like, go look at other teams' crowds when they play bad teams. It's not great. Go look at Assembly Hall. Like, this is a quiet thing. It's like, go look at Assembly Hall when we're playing some of those garbage teams, even in good years, the balcony's empty, or the balcony's like somewhat empty. And this idea of like, oh, in the night era, it didn't happen. We lived there. I was going to games. Like, it didn't happen then either. Like, a lot of those games in the night era, the crowds were a little dodgy on some of those teams. We're playing, athletes in action, or like, that wasn't a regular game, but playing some of those types of teams, like the Indiana Classic or the Hoosier Classic or all those the groups, like, those were not sellouts. Me and my buddies would move around and sit down real low because there was lots of open seats. So I do think there's a feeling that like everywhere else, it's just all sellouts all the time. And it used to be all sellouts all the time. That is not the case. And then, the last thing is like you talked about, is like, this is just an evolution. Like, you just don't go from Indiana football to Alabama football fan base in a year and a half. It's going to take some time. So at a high level, those are my thoughts, but I'm also just like, let's just enjoy this team, enjoy it, and talk about the team. And in 2 weeks, this isn't going to be a problem, because once we get to Big Ten play, I think they're all going to be sellouts. So like, what are we complaining? Not saying anybody's like, not Peter or anybody, but like, why are we complaining? But it's like, that's kind of my high level thought. So all over the board there, but that's my feeling.
Joe in the chat really had a comment that kind of sums it up. You can't undo decades of fan habits with one good season. That said, the support could be better. I look at it like this, and I think I might have talked about this we might have talked about it at the live show, or I talked about it on another podcast, but you've kind of got two fans right now, two types of fans. You've got the hardcore IU football fans, who are people like you and me, people like the people that are watching this at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Sunday, rather than just sitting there watching NFL. You're probably also watching NFL, but you're the fact you got us on means you're a hardcore. So congrats.
Welcome to the team.
And then you've got a bunch of bandwagon fans. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, IU football fandom has not been historically something that had a lot of cultural rewards for you. And the reality, I think, of the situation, I was actually talking with one of my favorite door folks that works the staff that work the doors and the entrances at Memorial. And we were chatting about the crowd. And I was like, look, you're almost going to need like an entire generation or two to wander in the desert now. And because you're just like people our age, Scott, and even people who are 10 years younger than us. And I think also to some degree, people that are 10 years older than us, the number of people who are diehard football fans in that group is pretty small, because there were very few rewards for being diehard football fans during that time. And so, yes, I think those people were excited that IU was good last year, but it's not a critical thing for them to be a part of. And for the bandwagon fans, they want to see blowouts and they want to see top level teams. And if they see a blowout, it's like, well, why stick around for the whole thing? How many touchdowns do I need to watch? And they're not looking at the Old Dominions and the Kennesaw States and saying, I got to go to that game. You would like to have that culture. But the reality is you're not going to build that culture in one season. And it's going to take a lot of sustained success for there to be a culture among IU fans that leads to the stadium being packed, leads to people staying for all 4 quarters. There's a lot of things there where it's going to take a while to build. And I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to get overly upset about it. I mean, if you track just basic attendance numbers and, take out who actually attended and who didn't, just drop count of tickets. Last year in the first 2 FBS opponent non-conference games against FIU, the drop count attendance was 44,150. This year against Old Dominion, it was 47,109. Well, that's tangible progress. I mean, that's almost 3,000 more tickets sold. Last year against Charlotte, which was the second one, it was 43,109. This year against Kennesaw State, it was 43,801. And keep in mind that Charlotte game last year, there was a lot of ticket sales just based off the fact that they beat the crap out of UCLA the week before. Whereas this year, you didn't have that benefit. So I do think that there are some items of progress being made. We know that there are still additions that they could make to the game day experience. We know that Indiana's got how would I put this? Indiana's kind of got a unique circumstance when it comes to its fans. You are an example of that unique circumstance. Indiana does not have a ton of fans that live in Bloomington as a proportion of the overall number of people that come to games. A lot of people live in Indy, which is roughly an hour away, a little bit more if you live on the north side. A lot of people from Fort Wayne, which is 3 hours away. A lot of people from Evansville, a lot of people from the New Albany, Floyd's Knobs area, a lot of people from the region, some people from out of state. It is a voyage to get to Bloomington to go to games. And unfortunately, to make that voyage something that you want to do consistently, not just against Nebraska or Washington or Michigan or Purdue, but to do it regularly in games against lesser teams, games that Indiana's going to win, to take that chunk of time out of your whole weekend, you have to have either a team that is commanding a huge part of people's hearts and minds all the time, or you need to have a team that's playing top-level competition and is itself ranked in like the top 10. Neither of those things is really happening here.
Can I jump in here for a sec? Like, I would also say this is kind of a good as the enemy of great. So I'm just going to go through some numbers here. Big Ten games at Memorial Stadium starting in 2021. We played Michigan State 50,000, Ohio State 52,000, Rutgers 40,000, Minnesota 38,000. That was the year that they lost. That was 2021. That was a bad season. 2022. Michigan at home 50,000, Maryland 41,000, Penn State only 45,000, Purdue 51,000. 2023, Big Ten, Rutgers, you had 43,000 at home. Wisconsin, only 45,000. Michigan State, you had 40,000 for a home game, and then that was it. Last year, Big Ten games at home, Nebraska, 53,000, Washington, 53,000, Michigan, 53,000, Purdue, 53,000. Maryland was 48,000. Sorry, I forgot that one. Okay. I would reframe it and say it this way. Last year, you damn near sold out all the Big Ten games, except that Maryland game, which had some of the best numbers of any game in the last 5 or 6 years. I think this year...
And was a bad weather game, too.
Correct. I think this year, you're going to sell out all your Big Ten games. We're talking about a game against, Old Dominion and Kennesaw State. Like, the fact that within 18 months, you went from a team that was drawing 40,000 against Penn State at home, that's a named Big Ten opponent. You're now selling out every Big Ten game. Like, that's a lot of progress. Again, are we going to go from 3 years ago, we couldn't sell out a Big Ten game to suddenly we're selling out bad team games in the non-con? You're asking for like not just the BMW, but the BMW with all the options. Like, we've stepped up to a point where I'm very confident that we're going to sell out all the Big Ten games this year. That's awesome. Like, let's look at the wins here. That's great. We did it last year. We'll do it this year. Next year, yes, let's start talking about winning all of our games at home again and maybe raising the floor of those non-con games. But I look at it a little bit differently, that like we're asking a lot out of everybody, the program, the fans, the students, the team, like to suddenly turn a noon game against Kennesaw State into the same atmosphere as a Big Ten game. The first step was honestly turning a Big Ten game into a Big Ten game, which we did.
I love that. That's great. No, and look, the people that are here, and I'm talking about the students primarily, are showing up in numbers at this time of year that I've never seen.
Student section was great. Yeah.
And the Big Ten season last year, the student section was tremendous. They just did such an amazing job of bringing energy all the time. And so, look, I think ultimately, to answer Mike's question, I wouldn't be worried. This is evolutionary. And, it took 10 years once they built Assembly Hall for there to be regular sellouts, even in games where you were playing lesser competition. Yes, and it was the same kind of thing. Yeah, you're going to sell out Big Ten games. You're not necessarily going to sell out games against lesser opponents because they're just not as big of a draw. And at the end of the day, you do make some kind of a calculus if you're coming in from an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours away. Like, what am I going down for? And until you get a team that is regularly performed at a very high level, you're just not going to get the ingrained culture. We're seeing it in reverse with IU basketball, where you had several Big Ten games this past year and the year before, teams that were in competition for NCAA tournament bids, Indiana teams, where you didn't have sellouts. You had clear vacancies, and that was among students, not just alums. I mean, that whole East balcony section for several of the games last year, yeah, it was full for Purdue. It wasn't full for a lot of the other games. So, look, you just can never take it for granted that people are going to want to go to your games. And you can never take it for granted that what you've done, not just in terms of the on-court or on-field results, but also in terms of the overall ambiance, is going to continually bring people in high numbers. And it's, as you said, it's not just an Indiana issue. It's something everywhere. Indiana had an amazing year last year. And I think the way that the season falls this year, they can have another amazing year. That Illinois game is already sold out. The Big Ten games are going to sell out. And I think a lot of these concerns will be put to bed. And then if they have another season where they win 9, 10, 11 games, threaten to go back to the college football playoff or make it back to the college football playoff, I think that helps their early season attendance even more next year.
Yep.
But it still isn't going to guarantee a sellout for every game, and that's fine. And I think that it's one of those things that it's so easy to take an obstinate point or an obstinate perspective on Twitter one way or another on this and just dig in on it and argue. And you're basically arguing with a straw man because you can go either direction on it, but it's easy to say IU fans suck because they're not doing this or that. It's like, let's just pump the brakes a little bit. There's been a long history of stops and starts. I don't blame IU fans for being a little bit hesitant to jump in fully, but the fact that they've jumped in more this year than they did last year is an indicator, in my opinion at least, that things are trending in the right direction.
Agreed.
On that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. As always, a pleasure. Thanks to all of you who joined us live as we talked through everything. And for those who didn't join us live, hopefully you enjoyed the show. And we will be back later on this week. A full slate of programming from the Back Home Network relating to college football coming up later this week. Some great shows. Of course, we'll have the Big Red Carpet with Rhett Lewis. That'll be coming out tomorrow evening, so Monday evening. So keep an eye out for that. We will have a special drop of sideline stories with Trisha Whitaker and Sydney Parrish as they've got Scott Dolson in for an interview. That'll drop on Monday as well. And then, of course, football weather. Myself, Matt Blaska, talking about what's going on in the college football landscape on a nationwide basis. That'll drop as well here in the next couple of days. And, of course, our entire lead up to the Indiana State game coming up on Friday. Scott, any final thoughts from you?
Nope.
All right. That'll wrap it up for us here. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is CrimsonCast. We appreciate you joining us as always, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.